All right, so today we got a new series called Buff, Nerf, and Change, and I am joined with the master of the Nerfs, Nerf.
Wait, are we supposed to be recording? Oh, you didn't tell me to start recording.
Yeah,
yet.
we're starting recording. But yeah, all right, not master of preparedness, but we also have Ellesmere, Holy Paladin advocate. You know,
today. Today I'm everyone's advocate.
If you brought to the table that we needed to buff Holy Paladins, I think we might have to change the series. And then we also are joined by Billy, aka Asuna. What's up, dude?
Hello.
So, what this is going to be is we're going to talk for a few minutes about things we want to buff, nerf, and change. And then obviously we have DPS, tank, and healer advocates. I don't know if everything here is going to be very spec or like role specific, but at the end of the day, we did want to kind of get like a variety of perspectives here. For the change advocation, generally people are going to be like swinging for the fences with some like hot hitting topics, such as things like you need to remove the WoW token or anything that makes a hit Asmongold video. So those kind of things. I think the best way of probably formatting this is starting with buffs and just going straight across the board. All right, so Billy, what are you trying to buff today?
Buff? Okay, well, to start off, I, as a DPS player, would like to buff Tank Threat because I think that some classes deal with it better than others, and I think that's a little unfair. For example, you got mages and rogues and night elves. You got windwalkers, I think, that mitigate it with clones and hunters. All these classes can like deal with like tank threat very easily because they have utility for it. But there's classes out there like Fury Warrior, I think like Havoc DH and like even Devastation Evoker. They just pull aggro and die, and it's not fun for anyone. So that's what I would like to buff personally.
What has made you come to this conclusion? Is it just Nerf's inability to be able to hold threat off of your lizard?
What does that mean?
Well, he's advocating for a tank threat buff.
Well, it's just like I pug all the time, and I just pull aggro, and it's very frustrating to feel like you're held back, right? I played in like Legion, right, where tank threat was like I saw what happens when tank threat's good, and it was like not a problem, so it felt fun to me, I guess.
To play devil's advocate is that intentional by Blizzard because they want DPS to have to think about like not just popping every button immediately on pull?
I guess so, but I guess as a DPS player, I don't find it too fun.
Oh, yeah. As a DPS, we want the DPS. We don't want to stop DPS.
Yeah, have you seen the clips?
I mean,
we don't want to hold DPS.
I agree. I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah.
The devil has enough advocates.
I do have a question though. More often than not, it's not an issue of somebody like attacking the pack beforehand, like before they should, or before the tank is actively hitting the pack and dying, right? It's more like 4 or 5 seconds into the pull, you just rip threat. Yeah, that's kind of what you're...
That does happen.
Yeah.
That happens, like, for the classes that I mentioned. I think that actually happens to them, right? Like, I think Devastation Evokers actually have a threat problem, and then, like, I'm pretty sure Warriors do too, right?
It's also a problem on bosses like Treemouth, for example, where, like, spawned ads happen frequently, and the tank doesn't necessarily have, like, a big AoE button for every set of them, so they'll just spawn and just start auto attacking people because the tank can't get insta threat on them, and it's very punishing and frustrating.
Agreed.
Nerf, what do you think about tank threat just as a whole?
I think some classes are fine, but definitely some tanks like Blood DK definitely have problems with like snap threat.
I was playing with my friend the other day, and he like had this problem where mobs were just like walking through his concentrate onto like us. Like I don't know, like but like so there's like some threat problems there. I don't know, like just walking through concentrates, and then like they tick once, maybe doesn't get the aggro, and then DPS have aggro, and then you popped your cooldowns and you're ramping, and then you gotta stop all your ramp, and it feels bad.
Okay, so Billy trying to buff tank threat, advocating for all of the tanks everywhere. Ellesmere, what are you trying to buff today?
Mine's a bit obscure. I think that drums and battle res item should be buffed. I think that in general, lust and battle res are two things that for a long time I have been an advocate for needing much stronger replacements for. Like, I don't think that those should be locked behind specs because I think they're too crucial to Mythic Plus as a whole. I think that that's not something that meta groups have cared at all about this expansion, simply because the meta has been, Prop Pally and Shaman and all these specs that already bring Lust and B-Res, so they don't really have to worry about it. But for groups that are not playing meta comps, it is legitimately a very big problem, especially because the battle res is a lot less accessible than it was in like BFA, for example, where you could
That's
just
true.
get the battle res item and then just everybody just had it. Now you have to craft an item, you have to get a tinker slot, and it backfires a lot. On top of it already being a worse form because it takes longer to cast and you have to be in melee. So I think that in general, the B-res item should be accessible to anyone, just like it was in BFA and Shadowlands. And I think that it shouldn't be able to backfire in Mythic Plus. I still think that it's fine to give it a short range and to make it a longer cast time, because obviously real battle res should bring something better. And I think that that's enough, though. I think as it is, it's a bit too punishing. And as for drums, I just think that Lust is way too crucial to Mythic Plus to gatekeep that hard, because drums are just trash compared to regular Lust. I think that it's okay to make drums worse for sure, but not like 20% worse, or 20% total haste worse.
Yeah. How do you feel about scrolls for raid buffs then? Because that was also something we've had in the past that got removed.
I mean, in general, I do personally think that just all the raid buffs should be gone. I think that raid buffs is a lazy way of making specs, making people have a reason to bring a spec. I don't think that the reason to bring your spec should be because you bring 5% intellect or, chaos brand or whatever it might be. I think there's too much disparity between the strength of spec buffs. Like you look at Mark of the Wild from Druid, which just brings 3% flat damage for everyone and 1.5% DR. And then you compare that to pretty much any other buff. Compare it to like Devo, for example, which just brings 3% DR, which is like infinitely worse. Or compare it to, Fort, which is just 5% health. Again, infinitely worse. Now, that's not saying that those aren't bad. It's just there's a big disparity between the strength of these buffs.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I don't know, it's just like an annoyance that you constantly have all of these new spec buffs that you have to try and like build comps around. And I'd much rather the comps be more fluid and tuning just be better, so that there's a reason to bring other specs besides just 5%, magic damage or something.
I like raid buffs.
That's fair.
I like raid
it's
buffs.
just my opinion.
Yeah.
As part of raid, right? It's in the
I
name.
agree.
Raid buffs. I think
Yeah.
it's good for raids. I don't.
Okay,
think
that's
it's good for
fair.
Mythic Plus.
I definitely was coming from more of a Mythic Plus standpoint.
I think for me too, it's like raid buffs. I think there's an issue with where only 80% of the classes have raid buffs and then the other 20% don't, and I feel like that leaves a feeling of being left out in regards to raid buffs. But I actually do think that it at least helps increase that diversity of classes that you are seeing represented in raid.
I think it's good for an RPG game such as World of Warcraft.
I would like the buff system if they kind of redid it a bit, though. Like when I think of like a good buff system, I think of like MOP or something, right? Where like a bunch of classes shared the same buffs, and there was only like 9 buffs.
You had
in the game, I
Hunter
think.
that could bring like a bunch of different ones.
Yeah, like when that's
their
like
pets.
I like that buff system a lot actually. I think it was in WoD too. I don't remember, but it was in MOP for sure.
I mean, overall though, you guys think that like engineering battle res and Lust, particularly aimed at Mythic Plus, you think that like drums and that kind of thing should be changed?
I think
They could use a buff. I think.
I think drums are really, really bad. Yeah, I'm a mage player, right? Drums are really bad. They are so bad.
Yeah, drums are bad. I think the engineering battle res backfiring is really bad. The fact that you have to even use the engineering item to begin with, I think, is enough of a negative
I think
drawback.
the problem of it is
that,
like
it shouldn't backfire.
I agree.
The accessibility, I think, on it is pretty bad compared to previous expansions, where it was always good.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it takes a whole spark to get a
that is
battle
so
res.
stupid. That is so dumb that it requires a whole spark.
And it still backfires. Like, I don't know.
Okay, Nerf, what is your thing that you want to buff today?
Blood decay.
Okay.
Told you.
What about Blood Death Knight do you want to buff?
The problem with Blood Decay, I was gonna talk about this in the change too. I think Blood Decay just needs like a whole rework, at least for Mythic Plus. Like it's just the class is just too feast or famine. Like it's either massively overpowered or it's like really weak, and I think it's just not good for that class. It's either like super powerful, does a bunch of damage, and like just infinitely self-sustains, or just gets one shot, or potential one shot the higher key you go. Like obviously for like your weekly 20s, it's fine and whatever. But if you want to push high keys with Blood Decay, it's significantly more challenging than other tanks.
We pretty regularly see them in raid too. It's funny because it's like mostly a Mythic Plus issue, because in raid nothing is EHP checking you like a Mythic Plus
Yeah,
dungeon
exactly.
will.
Yeah,
Do
it's
they
fine in
still,
raid, which is why it's like mainly just a Mythic Plus problem that the class just is not good for scaling content.
Yeah.
Does it still have the build where it has to like keep hitting stuff like the force that it had in Sepulture? Does it still have that kind of build?
No.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, Blood Decay damage kind of sucks. And then, I mean, it has a lot of buttons to live, right? Like, it has a lot of defensives that can press, but you always run into the problem where you can
You mentioned threat earlier.
you have a chance to get one shot, yeah, and their snap threat's not that good. Like, it just all their buttons just feel really weak to press. Like, they don't have a strong button, they don't have like strong burst that they can just press.
Okay, so Nerf trying to buff Blood Death Knight. I think that all of these things that we're trying to buff today are all pretty valid. Ellesmere's not coming and being like, oh yeah, Holy Paladin needs 300% damage.
Okay. Why you keep bringing up Holy
Shocked you
Paladin?
didn't say that.
Well, it's because you keep tweeting about it, okay?
Okay, well, the tweets worked. We got our redesign. I'm excited.
A lot of copium for the 0.5 patch.
Lots of copium. Okay, all right. Let's move on.
All right. Let's take a look at some things that we think need to be nerfed. There's a lot of things that could be nerfed this patch, and if you're looking at some of those popular things, some would say maybe Devastation Evoker a bit too strong. Some would say, what are other popular things they want to Prot Paladin off healing?
Shadow Priest.
Shadow Priest. The importance of Mass Dispel, I think, could also be
TI.
Yeah,
Oh my
importance
God.
of Mass Dispel for sure.
All right, Billy. What is something that you want to nerf today?
Shadow Priest. No, I'm joking. I want to. There's this like theme, and like half the dungeons this tier where all these bosses have these ads that they want you to instantly target swap or you die.
Okay.
And this is something that really, really frustrates me, right? Because my main spec is Fire Mage. My secondary spec is Frost Mage. Those are two polar opposites, right? Like Fire Mage, not good at target swapping. Frost Mage, insane at target swapping. But I want to play Fire, right? And this is probably true for maybe other classes too, right? Where you have to play a build where you have to swap to these ads or on these bosses or you die. And it feels like I can't play Fire in these dungeons or the spec that I want to play, specifically because these ads need to die, right? We got like the totems on Brackenhide last boss.
Okay.
And then you got like Oldemon, the second boss, has the totems too. Like I think they also have totem rules where
Last boss
I don't think
Vortex,
you
right?
can- Yeah, Last Box Vortex is one of the most egregious ones, right? Like, it is the thing has the most HP ever, and if it goes off, or if it's too long, and then the chain lightning comes out, like you just kind of die without an immunity, right? And it just like kind of gatekeeps certain classes, I think, from doing super super high keys or certain specs rather. I'd say. In my case, it's like Fire versus Frost. I can't really play Fire in these dungeons because
Mm-hmm.
I can't target swap that well, so we just die, right? So I would like to nerf that so much. Like it's really frustrating.
So do you think it's just? Do you think it would be solved by something like Blizzard in like creating an HP cap on those bosses for just like the summoned ads post 20, or do you think it's something that like the bosses themselves should have been designed differently?
I almost think it's just like a damage nerf on some of them, or like it's just so punishing. I guess the end result of not killing it is just too punishing.
Okay.
And I think half of them have to do with damage, right? Like Vortex, Pinnacle, Oldemon, Neltharian's their first boss. Like those bosses, like if you don't kill them, you just die. I guess. Or, like it's just too overly tuned damage. I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like Brackenhide last boss, it's not overtuned damage wise, but then you get the damage down debuff, and it's just like too punishing. I guess. It also makes boss last really long. Like critical bosses will last too long because you'll end up killing more and more of these ads. So like the effective HP is going higher each time a totem is spawned because you have to kill the totem and then the boss, right?
I mean, Ellie and Nerf, what are you guys thinking about like ads that are summoned off bosses that require like intense target swapping? Have you guys been feeling about that this season? It's definitely more present than it has been in the past.
Yeah, it's definitely punishing, but I don't know if it was their intention. But it helps with class diversity, right? In these dungeons.
Okay.
Where some classes might be better. Because I mean, if do you feel the same way about some dungeons having requiring like a disease or poison dispel, or like how certain affixes like afflicted or what was the current one?
Incorporeal. Yeah.
Like how certain classes can only handle that too. Because like in a way it's all the same, right? Like only certain classes handle it better. Like I have a big problem with Enrage, like the raging affix where it only where soothe, but.
So, yeah, I'm in agreement.
I think it helps with class diversity though.
I'm in agreement,
I can
but
see that.
with kind of, I think that it is good for class diversity. I think the problem starts to arise when, without certain specs, something becomes too difficult. Like, I think that certain specs should make things easier. I don't think that it should be like almost impossible without certain specs. So, for a good example of that is like raging, right?
Sure.
Like, raging is a nightmare if you don't have a soothe, basically. Another example is actually what I was going to bring up from my Nerf thing, which is Mass Dispel. There's a lot of encounters and trash and bosses in these dungeons that require basically a Mass Dispel. And if you don't have one, the fight difficulty ramps a huge amount. Not just like a little bit, it ramps a lot.
Okay.
And that's something that's been frustration since Theater of Pain, the boss with that put out 2 debuffs. Same thing with Shaw of Doubt, the boss that put out 2 debuffs. You know, Mass Dispel or like a Warlock Dispel, Davos Inspires, all those kinds of things. Those fights just got trivialized basically by having a second Dispel, Magic Dispel. And I think that kind of stuff isn't necessarily great for the game. I think that if you want it, like if it makes it easier, then that's fine. But like the difficulty shouldn't ramp that significantly if you don't have that specific utility.
Is there an example of that?
Yeah,
Of
I'm just
like,
thinking, how does this like tie into like target swapping in classes that are more prone to being good at target
Oh,
swapping?
well, I was
versus,
just
like,
building off of Nerf's point, which is that the target swapping is a part of class diversity that they're trying to push in M+ by designing different types of, things that we have to counter, and totem swapping would be one of those.
Yeah.
Mass Dispel would be another, or having a second Magic Dispel, etc. So yeah, I mean that's kind of how it ties in. But we'll focus on Billy's point before we move on to Mass Dispel and Magic debuffs. To Billy's point, I do think that in general, it's good to have variance in damage profile requirements, or desires, I should say, rather than requirements, to counter things like these totem swaps. The problem is when they become too punishing without like comps that are built specifically around having high totem damage, because the totems have so much health and need to be killed so fast. Like, for example, last boss of, Brackenhide, the totem needs to be killed within what, like 4 seconds or 5 seconds?
It's like 6, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's like a very specific damage profile that you need to counter that. And if you aren't able to counter that, you pretty much just die in a high key. There's no real counter to that other than just killing it in time, which just locks you into very specific comps because of it. If it was less punishing, if it went off, or if it, had less health, so maybe you only needed one of a specific type of spec versus needing like multiple specs that can counter it, then that would be better. But right now you need like a whole team built around it.
It's never gonna have less health with infinitely scaling content, though, right? Like it's always you always reach a point where
it depends on what gate keeps you first. If it's dungeon timer / whatever survivability, or if it's totem health. But
it's
I see
a really fine line to draw, right? Like you make the encounter challenging enough to where you actually have to swap to it, or like if it has no health, then you could literally just have like the tank and healer just kill it.
Well, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's definitely a fine line you have to walk, for sure.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think of like bosses that have ads that are like reasonable, right? Like the second boss of Nelth and fourth boss of Nelth have reasonable ads they have to swap to, but it's just like some of them are just very punishing, I guess.
I think a big part of it's actually the duration of which you're expected to kill these ads sometimes. And
the frequency.
Yeah.
Like some of the bosses, the frequency is just too high.
I mean, the Brackenhead one is so weird too, because if you have a cast go off, then your healer stops doing damage to it. Whereas like if you don't have a cast go off and your healer is able to full DPS it, it's so much easier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's really bad because you have a cast go off, then everybody is doing 5% less damage too.
Yep.
And if it lines up with the boss AoE, it's just a one shot.
So moving on from Billy's Nerf, Ellesmere, we kind of got a hint at what yours was. Is there anything more you want to add to like importance of Mass Dispel and like why nerfing that? I think maybe giving examples is probably better.
I don't think necessarily that Mass Dispel should be nerfed. I think that designing encounters to be very punishing without those specific counters is not a great idea. So, for example, the Trash and Vortex Pinnacle in the first area, the Gust Soldiers, they do this this rushing wind thing where they put a debuff on somebody, and on high fortified, that debuff hits extremely hard. And if you have a second Dispel, then you never have to worry about it ever. But if you don't have a second dispel, then basically one person on those packs of 2 soldiers, one person will always just be sitting that debuff, and they need like a huge external / defensive and a ton of like target healing in order to survive. And if they don't have it, then they just die. It's like that shit hits so hard, especially on bolstering. So that's like, that's one example. Another example would be, Emberon in Uldaman, or even last boss of Uldaman too. But we'll talk about Emberon, because Emberon puts out a basically 10-second debuff on your group that deals a lot of heavy ticking damage, and it goes off around the same time as the boss AoE, which is basically like almost a one-shot on high keys. And when those two are close to each other, it's really, really easy to lose people unless you have a Mass Dispel. If you have a Mass Dispel, you can just dispel every set of those, and it basically trivializes a fight as a healer. So like with Mass Dispel, not much difficulty on that fight at all. Like I would rate that a very low difficulty fight.
Mhm.
Without Mass Dispel, it's an extreme difficulty fight for the healer. So like the variance is just too high, right? I'd be okay if it was like a medium difficulty fight for a healer without, or with, and then like a high difficulty fight for a healer without. But right now the variance is too extreme. Another example is first boss in Brackenhide is super punishing if your tank either doesn't have like an immunity, or you don't have some type of dispel, or, unless you can like really zerg your totem down. That fight is made significantly easier when your priest can just mass dispel the tank from their disorient, so that they can soak the line, so that you don't have to just like dump all of your damage instantly into the totem. Now that one's not quite as an extreme of an example, but it's just another example of, that same thing. Hull's first boss is another good example.
Yeah.
Halls of Infusion, the Watcher.
And the dragons.
And the ice dragons on the trash. So on Tyrannical, on that first boss, if you have a Mass Dispel, you can just MD every single set of those dots, and then the fight is pretty easy. If you don't have a Mass Dispel, not only do you have to like commit shit to keep the people with dots alive while they have the debuff, then as soon as the debuff expires, they have to run out of the pool and take a bunch of damage there as well. And then as soon as that ends, the boss queues up his next ability. So it's just like a ton of AoE healing constantly, basically, if you don't have a Mass Spell. Whereas if you have a Mass Spell, you get a really pretty significant break to like recharge and like prep your next AoE heal. So it really makes a big difference, especially in the last phase. I mean, there's other examples too. Like you said, like the Ice Dragon on Fortified is basically does nothing if you have Mass Spell. And if you don't have Mass Spell, it's like a huge healing check. I don't know. I just think that the gap needs to be smaller in these encounters.
And do you think this is only an issue of Mass Spell, or do you think there's other issues? I think like Nerf alluded to Soothes.
Oh yeah, no, this definitely goes further than just Mass Spell. Like Raging, for example, with Soothes, like Nerf was talking about. Or same thing with like Curse Dispels, right? Like whenever you're designing something that requires something that only certain specs bring, it should be punishing, but not too punishing if you can't counter it with that, similarly to, like Halls and Shadowlands.
I mean, it's a tough line to walk, right? Because of what Nerf was saying earlier about class diversity and really making classes feel like they're useful in dungeons, though, right?
It definitely is a tough line to walk, but I think there's something to be said for like making your group's life easier without trivializing a mechanic.
Okay.
Right?
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I think they made like good changes to like the last boss in Neltharis, right? Like the curse.
Yes,
Before
like
it was
It was a good change.
it was like a huge dot, and then there was a stacking dot, and then they made it only to cap at one stack.
that's a great example of Blizzard actively addressing what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I think if people just continue to point these things out, they'll probably change. They've been pretty receptive to feedback, at least.
Yeah.
This expansion.
That is something that is actually super true. They've been fast too at changing stuff, which is surprising.
Absolutely. It's been really nice.
Okay, so Nerf, what is something that you were looking to nerf?
Neltharian's Lair.
But we're picking a dungeon. Okay, why?
Yeah. I think there's just too many punishing things in there. Like the timer is like super easy, but like almost all the bosses except for the second boss is super punishing.
Okay.
Well, I don't think the last boss is that hard either. But like the first boss, I mean, with the ad spawning, and then like you have to killing them. I mean, it goes a little bit with the Billy's point of ad spawning. You have to kill them in time. That makes it difficult. But one thing I would change with the first boss, I don't think you should take the damage from the shards when you get knocked back by the boss. like the shards on the ground.
Yeah.
Like it favors range heavily because range can outrange the shards on the ground and then not take that damage. Um, and then like the pelters do a ton of damage, and then the crocs their bleed does a ton of damage. Even that little scorpion in the beginning does a ton of damage. You know, even on tyrannical. And then the piercing shards you can't stop. It's just everything just does a bunch of damage in that dungeon. Uh,
That's like one of the only
and it's
dungeons
like
you have to like CC, right?
yeah, and
Yeah.
it's like really it's
Yeah.
like really weird too. It's like that dungeon. Like again, it's like super free on time, but like everything just does a bunch of
It-
damage. So I don't know. Maybe it's balanced because you can take it super slow and CC things, and the timer is free. But it just feels vastly different from other dungeons in the current Mythic Plus pool.
Sure. I have a question then. Would you ever be okay with an underrot buff? I know it's kind of getting away
An
from the nerf.
under buff,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like the timer or the mechanics?
yeah.
Uh,
I think it's early enough in the season where an underrot buff
Buffing
would
the
be
dungeon itself is what
Would
I
be
was
fine.
referring to.
Yeah, I think that would be fine.
Okay.
Like I think I can't speak for the the Mythic Plus community, but as someone that's part of that does Mythic Plus, I think it's healthy for Mythic Plus if you can go both ways, right? Like if you expect nerfs to certain dungeons, like other dungeons that are easy should be buffed to be more challenging. As long as it's within reason and then brings it in line with everything else.
Of course, and it's not like somebody's asking you, I guess, buff. What are the other easier dungeons this season? Maybe like Freehold and Brackenhide. Nobody's like, oh yeah, those need to be buffed.
Yeah, exactly. Because it definitely, if you run Mythic Plus a lot, it definitely sucks when you start pushing keys that you just want one key to just reroll all the other keys. I don't think that's good.
So the last thing we got are changes, and these are typically aimed at like pretty large game specific stuff. Okay, so what massive changes do you guys have prepared for today?
I have a long shot one.
All right, I'm listening. I'm ready.
Okay, this could be a crazy one because it would obviously change. I want all gear that you loot to be bind on account.
I don't count.
Whoa.
Account.
Hold on, let him cook.
Yeah,
let him
yeah.
cook.
Holy
Let him
shit.
cook. Let him cook.
Listen. I could gear my alts with my main.
That'd be
I
sick.
could send all my loot over. If someone loots a leather item they don't need, I'm like, yep, that's going to the druid. It looted it again, that's going to the rogue, right? Like,
But
that'd be
okay,
so fun.
I could
We're
counter you
Diablo
with
now.
I could counter you with
Diablo.
nobody would ever trade gear in like at the end of a dungeon or from a boss or anything ever again because they would just be like, oh, it's for my third druid alt or some shit,
Third
so like
druid alt, that is
or whatever,
possible.
you know what I'm
That is
saying?
possible.
Like
That is possible. Yes.
gear trading would essentially be dead if they did that. But I also like the idea.
It would be cool to gear my alts. It's just a cool feature, just like a random idea, right? I guess.
How have you
Or
felt about
just make it so that current currency can be sent to alts. Like
Yeah.
That's true.
we've had pretty consistently a currency where you can like concentrated primal focus is last tier or this tier crests. Like I feel like Blizzard never opens up trading those things to alts until either like the end of the season or the next season. But I would love it if that currency was just tradable or account wide, like from the get go. I think that
actually
would be
thought
really
of,
good.
I actually thought of, when I thought of this, I thought of the currency too. And the first thing came to my head was like, damn, if that currency was account wide, imagine how that would impact the race the world first. Like that would be a
be
little crazy,
fucking
right?
crazy.
Yeah.
That would like that. I thought that was the first thing I thought. I was like, imagine. But I mean, hey, race the world first. It's
That's true. That's true.
Whatever.
I
But
mean, there,
like,
there is something to be said about having to play your alts to gear it, though, in
it
an
is RPG
MMO.
MMO experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true.
What if
It's just a crazy idea, I guess.
yeah, but like
That's what
if
I
it
do
was
with
just the
alts.
currencies, then you would still have to get the gear on your alts, right? Like if it was just the upgrade currencies, you would still have to get the gear on your alts.
Yeah, so
That's
if
true.
you have to get the gear anyway, you're getting the currency at the same time.
Yeah, but currency acquisition doesn't happen as fast as loot acquisition.
Well, it depends on what kind of player.
But-
Yeah, it
depends on
depends.
what kind of
Well, it
player you
depends on
are,
what kind of
Ellie.
loot you're after. Raid loot, sure. Like raid loot, you could get much
Yeah,
faster.
I mean, I guess it depends. That's fair.
What have you guys thought about the upgrade system this tier, Billy? What are you happy with this upgrade system, or do you think it's still something that needs more changing?
I think the upgrade system is good. I think it's a little OP, but
Mhm.
that's like the thing that I like, right? Obviously, I advocated for can't wait gearing.
Yeah,
Like I like easy gearing personally because it's like if you have good gear, then you actually get to play the game. That's what it feels like to me, at least, like the hard stuff. So,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I do like the upgrade system. It is OP though. I will admit, like, holy crap, I've never seen things like get geared so fast.
I think the upgrade system is good. I think crafted gear is too good.
Crafted gear is a little crazy. Yeah,
there is a
it's like the end game is like crafted gear. I think.
There is also a question as to
447.
whether or not 441, like, should you completely invalidate the first few bosses of the raid on Mythic by having just Mythic plus loot?
Yeah, I mean it's even more than just the first few bosses, right? Because
Yeah.
like we killed Magmarax for the first time, and people are rolling for loot for Transmog because they have crafted loot or like stuff from the vault. Like
Yeah,
that's
that is
just
weird.
crazy. That's crazy. I don't know. I personally like fast gearing, but something like that is crazy.
I think that the system currently, as it currently stands, could receive a nerf and still be a great system.
Yeah,
Yeah, like I said, it's OP.
I have two comments about the current system. One, I was actually going to put it in my nerfed category.
Really? Okay.
Because gear acquisition was just so extreme right now. I don't know. Normally you get a much longer sense of progression of your character, but this, like my character, I don't know, like week 2, I was like, okay, I'm basically full bis outside of like just needing, 5 eye level upgrades in certain slots, because you just get gear so fast. And once you have gear, you can upgrade like tertiary gear that you get instantly, which I think is great. Like, don't get me wrong. I really think that the system is cool, but I think that they made the crest cap a little too high. So I don't know. I don't think we should have been able to upgrade like every single slot essentially by week 2.
Yeah.
So I would have liked to see the amount of crests that we could have been obtained per week dropped a little bit, so that there could have been a longer sense of progression, and so that gearing could have felt a little bit more meaningful, especially from like raid and stuff for the first few weeks. But I will say that the system as a whole is really cool and addresses a lot of great, and I think it's like a better loot system than we've had in a while.
Definitely agree with that.
I just think it's too much too fast. I don't know.
There's people who play the game for that sense of a gear progression. So like like to go against myself, like that's just my preference, I guess. There's people who do like the slow progression of gear.
And I mean, I think that a lot of us typically play the game for the content itself, not necessarily for the gear progression. But the gear progression is certainly a part of it. But with Blizzard, if Blizzard made all gear bind on account, like Billy is advocating for, then like
my change is evil.
It would definitely be something where the content itself has to stand alone, almost independent of the gearing system. Okay, Ellesmere, what is the thing that you want to change?
Okay, so my change isn't quite as huge as you wanted our changes to be. I didn't realize that it was supposed to be something like absolutely massive. Mine is focused on dungeon checkpoints.
Okay.
I think that the philosophy that Blizzard has behind dungeon checkpoints right now is a bit flawed. I know they spoke out on it, basically speaking mostly from like an RP stance, in terms of like they don't feel like you should just be spawning after each boss at that specific location, because it doesn't make any sense from like an RP standpoint, and that like you should be spawning at the start of the dungeon, and then they should just create like shortcuts to each of the areas from the start of the dungeon so that it's easier to get there. In my opinion, that's like an interesting thing conceptually, but I also think that once you step foot into Mythic Plus, you like RP definitely should not be the core focus. Like, I think something like that might be fine for Mythic Zeros, but once you step foot in M Plus, like it's the same reason that they changed, like Halls of Valor, the like super long Odin thing, like it's for the same reason. Like when you're in an M Plus, RP shouldn't be that impactful on the key. That shouldn't be like a core focus of the key. And I don't know. To me, it's very, very frustrating to have these checkpoints be so punishing. Like deaths, rather than just being like,
Run
5
back.
seconds off the timer, plus you lose the person for that poll. Like that's already hugely punishing, or you have to spend a battle res or whatever. But to add to that punishment, that the person also needs to spend like a minute at least running back, sometimes in cases like Brackenhide, like full multiple minutes. It's just it's too, deaths become way too punishing at that point.
Sure.
And so I would like to see a system, a consistent system too, because like the other thing I don't like is that it's very inconsistent. Like some dungeons, super easy checkpoints, like makes a lot of sense. Other dungeons, outrageously bad checkpoints. And so I would like to see a consistent system of just anytime you defeat a boss, you spawn at that boss's location, as long as it makes sense within that dungeon. You know,
Does anybody even disagree with this? Because I feel like that's a pretty popular opinion among most people who are just pushing Mythic Plus.
yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anyone really disagree with that, but also Blizzard hasn't really changed their stance.
I mean,
so,
Blizzard's the only people who disagree with it, right?
well, I imagine that Blizzard has a reason for, you know, keeping that.
Well, it's because they haven't done a 2.5 minute Neltheris run back yet. Surely they'll see. Surely they'll see my
that's
point of view once
possible,
they do
but-
that run back.
Yeah.
Okay, so Nerf, what is your change?
I would like to change the Mythic Plus system. Well,
Okay.
it's not a big change.
Okay.
I would just like to see a point to doing Mythic Plus week to week, because currently, like, okay, this is obviously only for, you know, pushing the highest keys. There's no benefit to pushing early or anything like that.
Sure.
So I would like to see a change, like you know, back in Mr. Pandaria with challenge modes, if you held like the best time for a certain dungeon, you would have a title that's associated to that dungeon.
Yeah.
Like, just if they brought something like that back, where you had the best time in the dungeon, like, it would like give you something to push for, you know, every week, you know. So like, if, you know, let's say you know, somebody has the best time in Halls of Infusion, like you could go and push Halls of Infusion that week to try to get the best time to get the title. But other than that, it's like there's no benefit. Like, you might as well just spend, like, everybody just spends all their time gearing, and then, like, especially when a big patch like the 0.5 patch is gonna come out, you know, that's still within the same season. Like, so much is gonna change, and like, pushing early just doesn't really do anything for you.
I've seen some people, and tell me how you feel about this. I've seen some people advocate for a change of a system of like a snapshot system for the rank 1 title instead, where you have to maintain like 3 or 4 weeks consecutively over the title cutoff over the course of the whole entire season for you to be able to achieve the rank 1 title.
I don't.
Is that to,
No, I don't think that's good.
You don't
I
like
think
to
that
counter
would
people
be-
getting it last second or something?
I think that would be to counter people buying it, basically.
Oh, true.
Well, people will still buy it.
but it also
Yeah.
it also incentivizes you pushing early, right? Because if it's a snapshot system, you could actually just secure the title the first 4 weeks of the season, take the rest of the season off if you wanted to.
That's true.
Like, I don't think that's true, because like, what was the first? What were people's rating at, like, the first month of season 1? Like,
Well, no,
it went up to like.
Let me pull
He's just saying that you could, if as long as you held rank 1 for the first 4 weeks, right? Then you wouldn't have to play for the rest of the season because you would have secured your title, right?
Is
yeah,
that how it
like
works?
well, no,
Well, that's
I'm
what
saying
he's proposing.
yeah, like how would you feel
Oh.
about snapshots, like just as a whole?
No,
Because
I don't know.
the first 4 weeks rating was 2,400, 2,750, 2,900, right around 3K.
Yeah, and I mean, and then the cutoff ended up being like, what, like 30, almost 3,300,
33 something. Yeah, 3297.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's too much in that direction, right?
Sure. I
Yeah, I
do
don't
think
know.
there is
There's
no
gotta-
reward for pushing early.
Yeah, I feel like there's, like race the world first. Obviously, there's no reward other than, getting the fame and glory, whatever,
The prestige,
by
yeah.
itself. Yeah, the prestige. But like, I don't know. Mythic Plus is just not quite the same, because it's quite the opposite of Mythic Plus, right? Because race the world first, people will care about who does it first, and like at the beginning, and then Mythic Plus is you just care at the end.
Yeah, you just care about
So-
getting either the title or ending the season as rank 1, or
Yeah,
it doesn't matter who timed the first 26 Court of Stars.
yeah. Like the early season is kind of irrelevant.
Maybe
Yeah.
you could do something where no, I don't like that.
It's good for your
I'm not even gonna share it.
It's good for
Let 'em
like
cook, let 'em
streamers
cook.
though. It's good for streamers though, of course.
What is?
to be pushing early, right? Because that's not
Well,
that-
sure.
that's nothing
but like,
Blizzard involved.
yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely not a lot of there's like basically no incentive or try to find motivation to.
I like
Do
the
it
idea
early.
of like getting a title for being rank 1 at the end of a week or something.
It doesn't have to be at the end of the week, it's just,
Or
as
just-
you get it, as you just you have it, and then somebody else could try to get it at any point.
Oh, like you maintain it as long as you're
Yeah, as
at
long
rank
as you
1.
have the
just
yeah,
like
as the-
it
yeah,
worked in MOP. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I
As
don't
long
even
as you have
That
like,
is
the
a
best
cool
time.
idea.
I don't even know if it has to be necessarily tied around rank 1. I do think that there's almost certainly an issue of just it not being worth pushing at all early season. Like I don't even think it's necessarily just an issue of rank 1 players, I think it's also an issue of like pretty much anybody. Why would you ever do anything above a 20
Yeah.
right now?
Yeah, that's the other thing with the Mythic Plus system. Like they changed the +2 and the 3 chest loot, like, and the bonus. So now the bonus loot doesn't start happening until you start timing keys above +20. But anyone that's doing a key above +20 doesn't really care about the loot anymore.
That's true.
Because it's only like
So-
20% per key level.
Yeah, so like I don't know. It's just the bonus loot is useless, right?
hmm
It's definitely some relics of the past in the Mythic Plus system that could be changed.
Okay. Any final thoughts for this video this week?
When is tempo 1.5, man? That's what I need to know.
What are you waiting on? The mage changes, man?
Yeah, I need my
What do you
my
think he's
Omega
waiting on?
rework.
There's something about something Rune of Power.
Same shit
Yeah,
I'm
Rune
waiting
Power.
on.
Something Avenging Crusader.
Augmentation Evoker.
Oh my gosh. Nerf DN is on the rise.
Did you
That's
see
right.
Preed's picture on Twitter? Posted a Twitter where he's like a augmentation raid where they like fully buffed up a fire mage and then he did insane damage.
I did see that, yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Hopefully 10.1.5 is going to be soon, but I think that's going to be it for today's video. Goodbye,
Hopefully not
everybody.
too soon.
Hopefully soon.
Hopefully
Hopefully
not too
soon.
soon.
Hopefully
I'm trying to
soon.
play some Diablo 4.